Welcome along to the top 10 worst units of medieval, looking at late Middle Ages in particular, and the brand new DLC Storm of Arrows. Let me just say that these aren't the absolute worst units a lot of the time, at least, especially maybe the first 4 or 5 units. They're mainly units that I've just got question marks over. They might be harder to use than some other similar units, and it's not until we get really to about the top 5 units that then I can honestly say they are terrible. So with that in mind, and you also might have your own opinions, so it's just also for a little bit of fun. But I'm going to start out my top 10. I'm going to go with the Bombards. Again, not to say that they're terrible, but when you compare them to the light guns, there's quite a few things to consider, and I've done a lot of number crunching, loads of figures to go through, but I'll just simplify it and give you the outline. Okay, so in themselves they're quite useful, but it's just when you compare them to light guns, it's what are we paying for? Now, the Bombards, they have the range of 9, whereas light guns have the range of 6. So there's the difference. But if you checked out my top 10 list of the best units, and I had the light guns at 7, I think, and one of the things that I said was you've got to use these guns in conjunction with your bowmen. Don't fire them in isolation, because this game isn't really set up for casualties as much as cohesion checks. And if there's a cohesion check through missile fire, then you fire with your art, and then the infantry or enemy unit will have an additional -1 modifier to deal with, and you're more likely to disrupt a unit. Saying all of that, you're not probably going to get missile fire or archers firing from a range of 9. So yes, the Bombards have that wonderful range, but a lot of the time you're just going to be firing in isolation because maybe your archers aren't anywhere close to that unit, so it might well be useless. I guess where it might be more useful is kind of more in the middle of the battle, when the enemy is a lot closer, where there's a hill like this. A small hill is going to be great for this kind of unit. And then if the enemy's here and these crossbowmen are firing away, and then this bombard can fire, and if there's a disruption, it might be able to fragment a unit, or it just might be able to cause disruption with one volley of fire. So that's when it might come in useful. But these light guns are more mobile. They can move 2 squares as opposed to the Bombards that can only move 1. In my tests, going from a range of 6, 4 and 2, basically in the end they were the same, very similar figures. The casualty range from a range of 6 is 0 to 42, and it's the same for both units. And then the half arc, when units get closer and you want to maybe just turn your guns to fire, it's the same, it's 0 to 20. So casualties from a range of 6, it's the same. It's only from a range of 8. When I was testing, I had these Bombards firing at a range of 8. And if you're interested, the average in terms of casualties was about 8. They were getting on average about 8 casualties from a range of 8. It fluctuated a bit from 1 to 8, sometimes 17, 16, but the average was around 8. So yeah, there we go. When you look at the price, I just think that if I've got the choice, this is a German city list, and we've got loads of guns, but in a lot of lists you might only get the option to take, say, 2 light guns and 1 bombard, and then I'd probably just take 2 light guns most of the time. Yes, a hill like this, maybe where you can use your range and your friendly units are close by to the enemy, then yeah, perhaps. But overall, just I'd go with the light guns. So in that sense, these bombards go in at number 10 on my list. At number 9 on my list, I'm going to go for the Low Countries Spearman. This is quite a good unit, actually. In many ways, it's a large unit. It looks great as well, these really long spears. But I think, if we're going to be honest about it, they're probably better in high Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, because in the late Middle Ages there's just a lot more armoured units, and they tend to struggle more against units with that armour bonus. And they're quite pricey as well at 58 when you compare them to some of the armoured units that I'm going to compare them to. So I'm not saying that they're terrible. We'll go into the details now together. They can be good, but probably in the late Middle Ages they're not that cost effective. If we look at the stats against raw spear, they're 25 up on impact because of the quality. Defensive spear, billman, armoured spear, they're evens on impact. Veteran spear, they're 50 down on impact. Now you can really see the value of the veteran spear, because the veteran spear are actually 1 less, they're 57. And okay, they don't have the armor, but that superior quality in this game, superior quality is everything. As I've said many times, we count quality on the impact phase and melee phase. Armor only counts on melee phase. So those veteran spearmen, even though the price has gone up, they used to be, what was it, 51 or something? Now they're 57, but they still represent great value for money, because against this kind of unit they are 50 up on impact, which is a good bonus there. Against dismounted knights, they're also 50 down on impact because of the quality. Now in melee, they're 40 up against raw spear. Is that enough? I mean, they're 58, raw spear 24, and they're only 40 up. Against defensive spear, they're 15 up. They do get an overlapping bonus, because they get that. Because some of the other large spear units are even worse than this, because they don't get the overlapping bonus, but because they've got that 20% heavy weapon, they get the overlapping bonus. So that gives them a plus 15. So that gives them overall 15 up in the melee phase against defensive spear. But again, defensive spear are only 36. Against billmen, and you get a lot of billmen now in most of the armies, they are actually 15 down in melee, and billmen only cost 45. So that isn't great to be 15 down in melee. Veteran spear, they are 35 down in melee, and dismounted knights, they're 135 down in melee. But yeah, most units are going to suffer against those better units. But overall, underwhelming, really. It's an underwhelming performance. Well, in my tests, they were actually disrupting quite a lot of the time against defensive spear and billmen, Okay, they're a large unit, so they do get the combat strength modifier, but that usually only kicks in around the third turn, fourth turn. You really start seeing some proper bonus. It might go to 4%, 5%, 8% in favor of this unit, but the problem is a lot of the time, and the way the game is designed, it seems like the first, second, third rounds, including impact and then the melee phases, are really important. So when they were losing melee, they were losing like 48 men, so they were suffering anyway. So overall, if you are 15 down against Spearman in melee, it's not great. It's not great. It doesn't mean that they're always going to disrupt, but they could be a little bit better, because also that they're only protected. In late Middle Ages, you've got a heck of a lot of bowmen as well, crossbowmen, bowmen, and so they are also going to suffer because they don't have proper armor. Another disadvantage. Even armored spear, when I was checking their performance, armored spear is 42, and they are 16 less than this, and they're evens on impact and 5 down against them in melee. Okay, combat strength, you can sometimes it does come in handy, and they'll overcome units like that, but at the price, protected unit, I'm not so impressed. So yeah, they're going to go in at number 9. At number 8, I'm going for the Welsh Longbowmen. A few things to say. That they're not a bad unit, can be quite useful. We've got quite a lot of longbowmen, bowmen units, crossbowmen. This is the English 1320 AD list, and they rely on their bowmen because we have very limited amount of men at arms, and they're not the superior quality kind, and we've only got light lancers, so it's all about infantry and bowmen with the English, and they can be very useful as backup to your main longbowmen and crossbowmen. But if you compare them to, say, raw longbowmen, I just don't think that they really are that cost effective. There's a 7 difference. I did some tests actually. I had some raw longbowmen firing away, and Welsh longbowmen as well next to them. And in terms of the firing stats, at a range of 3 squares, the Welsh longbowmen can get 10 to 32 casualties. That's the range, whereas the raw longbowmen are 8 to 30. So there's hardly any difference. Bottom end is 8, 10 for the Welsh longbowmen, and the top end is 32 casualties, and it's 30 for this type. So really, and when I was testing, there was hardly any difference, if any difference, in terms of casualties. From range, both units were getting around 19-20 casualties. So not much difference. And then you've just got to look at their quality. So okay, when they're fighting in melee, this is average quality unit, the Welsh longbowmen, where obviously the raw longbowmen are only raw, but longbowmen and bowmen in general are just not going to do very well against infantry anyway. So I don't think that the Welsh longbowmen are going to hold that long against infantry, because they've already got that -1 on the cohesion check for fighting infantry in the open. the same as the Royal Longbowmen. So 7 difference. I don't think they're that cost effective. No difference from firing and minimal difference in melee. So yeah, justifiably I'm going to put the Welsh Longbowmen in at number 8, and probably they should be slightly cheaper, maybe 36. At number 7, I'm going for the Longbowmen. Longbowmen without stakes, 54. I've just got to say, when you're paying 54 for a bowman unit, that seems really expensive with no defensive protection. So, okay, the Longbowmen with stakes, I think they're 63, 9 more, and they, I've this DLC's only come out in the last week or two, so I haven't played tons and tons of games yet, but they seem to perform fairly well, the Longbowmen with stakes, because they've got the firing power, and then even against dismounted knights, men-at-arms, the stake can really hold those units down for quite some time. And Spearmen, they might even have an advantage as well if they've caused some casualties. So okay, Longbowmen with stakes are a great unit, but this type of unit, the Longbowmen with no stakes at 54, maybe some of you disagree, maybe you've had great success with them, maybe you've played more battles than I have and you want to leave some comments below and tell me I'm wrong. It could be the case. This kind of unit, it seems to me, could actually either get a lot worse and end up in my top 5 or whatever, or it may even leave my top 10 worst units list. But at the moment I'm pretty suspicious, and I do think that price 54 for a glorified bowman unit is really, really expensive. Something like crossbowmen is a lot better value for money, because you've got some armor there at 41. You're paying 13 more for protected bowman unit. Yeah, I at the moment I think they should be a lot less. I would even, maybe off the top of my head, I'd put them down to maybe 48 or something like that. I'm going to have to maybe do some tests and test them against crossbowmen and other bowman units, but 54 at the moment, as things stand, seems very expensive, and they go in on my list at number 7. At number 6, there were a lot of adjustments to my list. I'll be very honest with you. Originally, I was going to put the dismountable men-at-arms on my list, but actually, when I did all my testing, that unit is actually pretty good. So I took it out of my top 10 worst units list, and I tried to find another unit. I had 10, but then I took that unit out and I found it extremely difficult to make my top 10. And I haven't found that issue before when I was doing all my other top 10 lists for worst units in classical, in LA, in biblical, in high Middle Ages. I never had a problem. There were always more than enough units that you could put into your top 10, and it was actually, the difficulty was to squeeze in 10 and make a list. But I found with late Middle Ages, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I've missed anything out, and when you get to the end of the video and you think I should have put them in, please let us know. But I will be completely honest and say it is very, very difficult to find 10 units that you can say are pretty poor. And maybe that's because we've had so many DLCs. The developers have done a lot of hard work balancing out the armies, making sure units are cost effective, and they've done a great job, it seems to me. I've said before, this is my favorite DLC of the entire series, including Ancients, and it seems to be really well balanced. So I only just managed to squeeze in the Mongol Tartar Light Horse. That's what I'm going for. Mongol Tartar Light Horse. Fairly decent unit. I just don't like paying 36 for Light Horse. That's my issue. You've got Turkmen Cav, exactly the same price, but they're bona fide Cav with bow. So, you know, these units are great, Turkmen Cav. But for Light Horse, for the same price, it's a bit of a no-no for me. And then you look at other units. I mean, we're all familiar with Javelin Horse. That only costs 24. That's Light Horse as well. You've got the Light Horse with crossbow. That's only 26. That's 10 less than this. You've got something like Bedu Cavalry, Light Lancers. They're at 28. They're 8 less than this, and they're Light Lancers. So, not that cost effective. I guess what you can say, this is the Mongol list, only just creeps into late Middle Ages. Actually, it's the 1230 to 1353 AD list, so it only just creeps into late Middle Ages. And I guess you've got to talk about the army list and balancing it out, and maybe that does that. You know, you can't just have tremendous units everywhere and perfectly valued units and all they're going to be cost effective. So maybe you need some weak points, and this would be one of them. We're limited to 7 of the Turkmen Cav, so then we just got to take some Light Horse out. That's just the way it is, unless we go with maybe a few of the more expensive units. But in themselves, 36, they're pretty overpriced for me. So they are 6 on my list. At number 5 on my list, a unit that I've long hated. It made it on my original top 10 worst units for high Middle Ages, and now we're in late Middle Ages. It's here again. I just think for a Lightfoot skirmisher unit, 36 is a heck of a lot to pay. You've got Javelin Men at 24. Slingers, okay, in late Middle Ages, hardly any armies have slingers. I think the Swiss is one list that has access to them. And then you've got your archers, the skirmisher archers, and they're 30. So 36, I don't know what I'm really paying for. Average quality. They're not above average or anything like that. And then the other issue is, especially for the English, but you know, most armies have got access now to a lot of bona fide bowman units, and when you're paying 32 for raw longbowmen and 36 for light longbowmen, doesn't make too much sense to me. It really doesn't. I don't know what the price should be. Maybe 32. I mean, even if they're 32, I still probably wouldn't go for them if I can get raw longbowmen. There's hardly any instances where I'd go for, you know, light archers over proper archers, even if they're raw quality archers. But that's just me. You know, I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think of an instance where if there's lots of rough ground, okay, we can use our Lightfoot, our skirmishers, but then bowmen do perfectly well on rough ground. That's where you want them, on rough ground. So I really can't see for me personally, if you know, make some comments below if you like this unit and you think you pay 36 for them. But I don't know, they just don't seem to fit in armies with lots of bowmen. And I realise while doing my top 10 worst units, I keep coming back to the English. This is the English 1320 AD list. I think it's the Continental Army. And maybe this is telling us something. Maybe the English need a little bit of help. Just a little bit of help, because I know the French have had it hard for, you know, most DLCs from the beginning of medieval. The French armies were really poor, basically. But probably now the French seem a bit stronger than the English to me. And you know, these Welsh bowmen, they make my list. Light longbowmen make my list. Just standard longbowmen make my list for worst units. Maybe what we're really talking about is an adjustment for the army list. Maybe some of these units just need to be a little bit cheaper, or just upgraded in some way. Perhaps. Let's see. But anyway, in isolation, they don't represent good value to me. So they are number 5. At number 4 on my list, a unit that really annoys me, the Welsh Spearman. This unit made it onto my top 10 worst units list in High Middle Ages. Yet again, it's here in Late Middle Ages. Quite a few units crossover from High Middle Ages to Late Middle Ages. And this one just really struggles because of a few issues which we're going to go into. It's 50, it's quite pricey, and yet it's only lightly protected. There can't be that many units around this price that are only lightly protected. So it's struggling against armoured units, and you get a lot of armoured units in Late Middle Ages. And also you get a lot of bowmen and crossbowmen, and again it's going to struggle because it's only lightly protected. What are the stats? The stats against raw spearmen is 25 up on impact. Defensive spear billman evens on impact. Veteran spear 50 down on impact, and yet that unit only costs 7 more. Men at arms 50 down on impact. In melee, only 13 up against raw spear. More than double the price. Raw spear only 24, and yet only 13 up. And that is because raw spear, even raw spear, are protected. This unit's lightly protected, so they lose out there. Raw spear get that 12 bonus. So that means that they're only 13 up overall, which is terrible. Defensive spear. They are 12 down in melee. 12 down. And that unit only costs 36. Plus, defensive spear are heavy foot. And this is a medium infantry unit at 50. Really pretty terrible. 47 down against billmen. Billmen only cost 45. 5 less than this, and they're 47 down. 62 down against veteran spear. 160 down against men at arms. Absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. Also, even though this is a large unit, there is no overlapping bonus. That overlapping bonus is only for large units that have got 20% heavy weapon. And this unit doesn't have that. So they lose out there as well. In my tests, when I was putting them up against a range of units, they were disrupting against spearmen and a defensive spear, mainly because of that -1 modifier, because they are medium foot. Even though they're a large unit, spearmen, they're very fragile in the open against heavy foot. So really, originally they were higher than 4 actually, but I had to make some adjustments, and they've gone in at 4. But they should be cheaper. They should be maybe even the same price as Spearman. They should be about 45. Okay, they can form square. That's not a huge advantage. Yeah, they maybe they should be protected. Why are they lightly protected? Is that historical? Perhaps they could be heavy foot or something. I don't know. But as they are, they just are not cost effective in any way. And so justifiably, they go in at 4th on my list. 3rd on my list, I'm going for the Irish Kerns. Now this is a very interesting army list. This is the Irish 1320 AD. I think it runs to 1500 AD. And you've just got tons and tons of these medium foot units. Let's have a look. So what do we get? So they're medium foot, they cost 30, price isn't so bad, but they are only 50% swordsmen. So this is where they really do suffer. If you look at Irish and Scottish lists, you've got something like the Galwegian foot, which only costs 3 more, but they're impact foot. And I think they're 100% swordsmen as well. So they're much better than this unit. And even your standard medium foot, which is in a lot of lists, the Brigands, the Brigands don't have light spears. So when I put them up against the Kerns were 100 up actually, which surprised me, because the Brigands are swordsmen. So they were 100 down against Kerns. But then once in melee, the Kerns were 62 down against Brigands, which cost the same. And obviously impact is only the first phase of combat. So, okay, you need a little bit of luck being 100 down, but a lot of the time you'll hold, and then you're going to be every turn in melee 62 up. So these guys in themselves do not represent that good value for money. But in saying all of that, this is a classic example where you can't just analyze the unit in isolation, because look how many units I've got. This is only at 1200 points as well. So at 1200 points, fighting in the late Middle Ages, I've managed to put out 28 infantry units. Absolutely humongous army. And I've even got 2 cav units at the back there. So I don't know. Let's see how this army does in multiplayer, in the tournaments. I might actually take them out. I might take them out and just and see how they go, because it's the absolute definition of a spam army. And some of you will know a friend of mine, Warg. He's played in the league a lot and in the tournaments, and one of his favorite armies is the Scottish, one of the early Scottish lists in LA, which runs to 599 AD, and he's got one of the Scottish lists, and I think he has a unit like this, and he does very well a lot of the time, because if you've got 28 infantry units, most of the time, well, practically all the time, the enemy is just not going to have anywhere near that amount of infantry. And we've got the light spear as well, so it will hold on impact quite well often. And we've also got, what I also like is the Javelin Men. I always like cheap skirmisher units, so we can take 11 actually. So we want to take a few less infantry we can add to skirmishers. So it's a pretty interesting army. Don't see armies like this much, especially in late Middle Ages. So okay, not terrible. Maybe it doesn't deserve to be third on my list. Let's see how the army does. But in themselves, they will, especially against all the armor on the battlefield, they are just not going to last long. You've really got to hope you can get your flanks quickly, double up on units quickly, but a lot of units are just going to smash through these units because they're only medium foot, only 50% swordsmen. And the other disadvantage they have, which I noticed when I was putting them up against similar units like the brigands, they're only lightly protected. So even a unit like the brigands are protected, so they also suffer there. They're going to be 12 down against practically everything. Your defensive spear protected. And then in late Middle Ages you've got Spearmen as well that are armored, lots more armor on the battlefield. So let's see how this army does. But yeah, I'm not saying to make them better or put the price down, but they're an interesting unit, and let's see how they do. But anyway, they're going to go third on my list. At number two, I'm sure a lot of you will agree with me. The Free Canton Spearman, absolute garbage of a unit. It's lucky that hasn't made my number one. It almost did. It's just terrible. Medium foot at 39. It's not impact foot, just average quality. So the killer for it is just suffering against heavy foot in the open. I mean, when you look at the stats in themselves don't look that bad. Against raw spear, 25 up on impact, evens on impact against Spearman, and defensive spear 50 down against something like veteran spear on impact. In melee, they are 25 up in melee against raw spear. They're evens against defensive spear and 35 down against Spearman. That Spearman unit is pretty good value really, because it's only 6 more than this, and it's and this unit's 35 down against it, and veteran spear 50 down. So in themselves those figures aren't that bad, but it is that -1 modifier medium foot gets. So in my tests, even against raw spear, because raw spear is heavy foot, and it's 15 less than this unit, and it was winning in melee and causing cohesion checks. Every time heavy foot causes cohesion check, you're in trouble. When you're only medium foot, you're in trouble, because you're just suffering and you're quite likely to disrupt, and that's what this game is all about, disruptions really. So it really should be a bit cheaper. I don't know why it's more expensive than defensive spear. Okay, it's classed as offensive spearman, which is a small advantage, but because it's medium foot, it should be 36 really, shouldn't be 39. It would be interesting to take this army out. I might just take it out. I mean, I've been playing all these competitive games in the leagues, and maybe just for a bit of fun, I'll post a game up on the multiplayer lobby, and I'll take this army out. And it is a spam army. We've got, what is it, 23 of in this build, 23 of these spearmen. So we've got a bit of a spam army going, but in comparison to that unit we just looked at, the Irish Kerns, that's 9 less than this. You're saving 9 per unit for a spam army, and they're both medium foot. Okay, these are spearmen, but 39 is pretty expensive. So I'm going to be interested to find out if this army can succeed in late Middle Ages. Let's see. But in themselves, real garbage. Only protected 39. Yeah, just not a lot going for it. And they go in at number 2. Here we are. Finally, we've made it to our number 1. And for me, undoubtedly the worst unit in the game, if maybe not just in late Middle Ages, just absolute terrible. It is the Baltic levies. Practically nothing positive to say about this unit, but let's try and be objective. If we can. It is medium foot, 30. A lot of medium foot costs around this price, but the big problem is the quality. Quality is everything in this game, and there are very, very few units that are below average, and this is one of them. And also because they're swordsmen, their stats are absolutely terrible. So, on impact against defensive spear, they are 12 down. Against raw spear, they're 13 up. But remember, raw spear only costs 24. Against billmen, they're 12 down on impact. And against veteran spear, they're 62 down on impact. So they're down against absolutely everything apart from raw spear, which are only 24. In melee, it gets even worse. Against defensive spear, they are 62 down. Against raw spearmen, 37 down, and that is because these units are spearmen. So it halves the swordsman advantage, and they are 37 down against raw spear. Raw spear are also heavy foot, so they've got the -1 modifier, which is terrible because they're just very, very likely to disrupt in melee. Against billmen, 47 down in melee, and against veteran spear, 112 down. So really one of the absolute worst units in the game. Will not hold for 1 or 2 turns a lot of the time. It will double drop. It will disrupt half the time because it's got that double whammy. It's down even against something like raw spear, significantly down against raw spear, 37 plus it's medium foot, so it's just not going to hold against anything. And in this kind of army, it's interesting, this is Teutonic Order 1320, and I guess you've got to go all in more or less with your knights. Go for the knights, but in terms of infantry, it's kind of the main line really. Because I've maxed on the spearmen and the raw spear, and we've just got, if we're going to go with infantry, that's all we have. So I guess you know, if I was fighting with this army, I would just get rid of these guys and just add cavalry, mercenary men at arms. You know, almost 2 of those units, and you get 1 mercenary men at arms. I mean, there's just no comparison. And actually, yeah, it works out. Look, exactly. We can take 2 out. You got 63, and you just get a pretty decent unit. So there's hardly any reason to take these out. Alright, there's a big lump of, if you're going to be defensive, some marsh, maybe just take a couple, but you just can't rely on them at all. And even the irregular foot that we're so used, they're essentially like irregular foot, almost the same unit, but even a regular foot at the same price is average quality. So it's much better than this unit because this is below average. So justifiably number one on my list, without a doubt, without a doubt. So there we go. We've made it. We've made it to the end. Any units, I'll be interested as well if you can come up with other units that I should have included, because as I said before, I really struggled to get 10. So I've managed to do it. And if you do think there's anything I didn't include, I mean, okay, the field fortification units, the FF units, yeah, they're not very cost effective, but I just wanted to find units in themselves rather than all of those units. But yeah, I would agree that those units are not very cost effective. There were a few other units I was looking at. Peasants, yeah, we've got them here, but quite a lot of people like Peasants because they're so cheap. So it's an infantry unit at 15. You can also keep it right at the back and hide it. It just makes it a little bit more difficult for the enemy to get to 60 on you, because it adds to your army force. So some players quite like Peasants. I did have a look at the armoured offensive spear at 48. They did make one of my earlier lists in High Middle Ages because I said 48 is quite expensive for armoured offensive spearmen. But in Late Middle Ages, I quite like armour. You've got a lot more longbowmen on the field, so armour is going to protect you. So it's not going to make my top 10. So yeah, those were the sort of units that I was thinking of maybe adding. But anyway, it's been a bit of fun. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.